Well, good morning. Good morning. So it's been a while since I've been online, hasn't it? So, yeah, it has been a busy, busy past week, and I guess week and a day, I guess, since last time I streamed. Maybe almost, well, actually a week and a half, I guess now, if you really think about it. And my last stream was a couple weeks ago on a Thursday or Wednesday. So it's been a while. So hopefully you guys have had a great week. I know a lot of people went on spring break. A lot of people went on spring break. And I guess in some ways you could say that's what I did. I actually had a real estate conference that I had to go to in Vegas. Good old Vegas. It was awesome. We stayed at the Bellagio. I've never stayed there before. I've stayed in a lot of the other hotels. Got to stay in the Bellagio. Very beautiful hotel. Gorgeous. And to be honest, it's really close to everything. So that's really, really nice. So I truly enjoyed that. My wife came with me. We had a good time. Obviously ate good food and hung out and learned some stuff, connected with agents and all that. It was just a really, really cool time. And then we also, if anyone's out there that has ever been, we went to the Sphere, the new big Sphere out there. And we went and watched, I know they do a bunch of concerts and stuff there. I think like Backstreet Boys and all that is there as well. But we went and we watched the movie Wizard of Oz. Wizard of Oz, the not a new remake, not the Wicked, the original Wizard of Oz. And they remade this to kind of go along with this Sphere experience. And it was cool. So if you're out there, I would encourage you go check this out. It's a little pricey, but the experience itself is worth the money. It's kind of a once in a lifetime kind of experience because they have edited this movie where you have the actors and stuff, but the screen, if you've not seen the Sphere, Google it and check it out. I could probably pull it up. I might just do that just to kind of give context, just for fun as we get started. Let's just look at this. And images, here we go. Yeah, this is, and I'm sorry for those on TikTok. Thank you for being here. I don't know if I can share my screen on this one or not. But This is kind of like the sphere. You can kind of see it's got all these different, it's got all these major screens all the way around it. So it's this big bulb, snow globe looking thing in Vegas. And they can change the outside of the screen. I actually heard that, for the right amount of money, you can actually have something put on the outside of this thing, which that's kind of cool. I could see that being a use case if you live in Vegas and you want to sell some real estate, make a big blast of some kind. Maybe you can do that. That's what I heard. I don't know if that's true or not. Let me know. But anyway, that's what the sphere looks like. And it was really, really cool. So let me see if I can find something on the inside too, because it was just this big globe, but inside was major seating. Yeah, here we go. We'll just bring this up. I don't know if this will be big. Yeah. So you can kind of see the size of this thing. So look how small the people are. And if you look way down at the bottom there, this is like this is the band that's playing, and this is the screen. And look how small everybody is down there. So pictures don't do it justice on how large this place is. I mean, it's a massive sphere, and you're kind of banked like this, like really high and steep, and they just pack the people in, and it is a wild experience. But while we were watching the Wizard of Oz, it was really cool. They the chairs vibrate. They have big fans that blow. It's like the tornado scene is happening, and all this stuff is happening. And then they have leaves that are just floating around and being. So you really feel like you're immersed into this experience. And of course, then when the apple scene came, they dropped foam apples from the ceiling onto everybody, and so it's just a really, really cool experience. So I know I went on and on about this, but it's unique. It's a unique experience. If you go to Vegas a lot, you've probably done a lot of the shows, Cirque du Soleil, and all that. This is very different than those things, and I just encourage you guys to go check it out. It was a lot of fun. All right, with all that being said, hopefully you guys have had a great week. Let me know in the comments what you guys have been up to. What is spring looking like for you in real estate? Like, what are you experiencing as a real estate agent? I would love to get some feedback from you guys that are watching. Let me know, like, kind of, do you guys feel like the market is slow, picking up, the buyer market, seller market? Like, throw that out in the comments and let me know kind of what your thoughts are. If you guys are watching and can comment. A lot of people drive. I've noticed this is people are driving. So if you are driving while watching me, first of all, maybe just make sure you're just doing the audio. Secondly, don't comment. So definitely want to keep you guys safe out there. But anyway, let's see. There it is. Okay. So before I get into the show and really get started, let's talk about mortgage rates because it's been a little bit, and I know media, man, I was like kind of going through the articles this morning and kind of trying to find the articles I wanted to talk about today. And wow, there was a lot. Brian J, thank you so much for the follow. Appreciate that greatly. Thank you for being here. Do appreciate that. So the mortgage industry, like the news and the headlines and stuff have just been, what can I say? Like negative. And in some ways they always start off with that negative headline and then it leads into some of the context. And then it always seems like, as I was reading the summaries were on there and they were saying things like, but this isn't as bad as it could be. So there's like this weird positive twist at the end of all these articles. I didn't really pull those articles today. I'm trying to get through all that and realize, like, look, we're in real estate. There's always market shifting and pivoting, and we can, have all kinds of ideas and theories about what that might look like in the next few years or whatever. And those are all relevant and help us to kind of contextualize what might be happening now. But a lot of times it can be a lot of noise and the consumers are just reading it and it can get very confusing. And then they hone in on the mortgage rate. Like it's just like the easiest little metric that everybody can just quote and just use that as the metric if the market's good or bad. And I get it. It's a very easy thing to run with, right? When the interest rate goes up, it's like, oh, you're heading, interest rates have went up and they're going and they're soaring or whatever you want to say. Or now we've got a crash in interest rate, go out and buy, all this kind of hype stuff. The reality is interest rate is a factor, but it's not the only factor. There's many, many factors that go into the affordability or if now's a good time or not a good time to buy and all those type of things. But with that being said, it is a topic. So let's just, before I get into the actual show and begin the intro and all that, since this is not really part of the show, it's just something I do at the very beginning before I get started. Let me show you Mortgage News Daily because it has been a little bit since I've been on here. So we're going to use this as the base for the rest of the week. And I apologize, actually. I meant to live stream yesterday, but I actually, and again, this is a little bit of a bunny trail. I couldn't live stream yesterday. So if you're going back and looking for the live stream for Monday, I didn't do one, even though I said I would when I took off. The reason why is I actually got to sit in on a mock trial, a high school or middle school middle school students doing a mock trial in a real court with a real judge. And I was one of the jury members. And we didn't get to judge on the case. We were judging the performance and evaluating the students on their performance and how they handled the case. Wow, it was fascinating. This middle school kids were so impressive, so impressive. They handled their witnesses, asked them questions, cross examinations, the objections. The judge was gracious, but was a judge, and they had a bailiff and the whole thing. The audience had to keep quorum and all that. It was a really cool experience. Let me know if you guys have ever done that. I thought it was highly enjoyable. So I didn't live stream yesterday because I did that all day. We actually did 2 court sessions, and it took up until like almost 3 o'clock to get through both court sessions. Like one team did the defense, another team did the prosecution, and then the second time they switched and they did the exact same case, but they just switched sides, and it was really cool. So, all right, with that being another brain trip, I'm sorry. It's been a while, guys. It's just been a while, so I'm sharing you what I've been up to. Okay, so all right, this is Mortgage News Daily. This is where I quickly just load this in every single day. Again, I always say this because people, it's so funny, is like I'll get a comment, like on TikTok, whatever. You mentioned Mortgage News Daily. Are you an affiliate of them? Do you make money every time someone downloads this app? And I don't have to make any money. Like, this is just a good tool. It's just a resource. But right now, this shows you kind of where we're at. Let me see if I can zoom in just a little bit. And those on TikTok, I'm sorry, sharing screen. I get flagged every time I do it. And it's probably because there's like ads and everything else going on. But mortgage rates right now for a 30-year fixed rate loan is sitting right around 6.3. It's changed since yesterday, or actually no, the 19th, up 0.01, marginal. And then 15-year fixed is 5.91. 30-year jumbo is 6.52. And the 7/6 ARM is 5.94. And then you got a 30-year FHA and 30-year VA sitting at 5.88 and 5.89 respectively. So just as a thought here is we've definitely spiked up. I mean, if we go back just a couple months, we obviously were talking about hitting on the 30-year fixed at about 5.99, right? We dipped below that. And then all of a sudden we began to go back up. I mean, just overnight it kind of spiked. And obviously there's external stimuli that's causing this to happen. And it's the Iranian war, the insecurity of what that does, how that puts a strain on the economy and all that. So the bond market, all those type of things are a factor. And that spiked the interest rate up. And that's where we got. We got up to, 6.35 or something like that. Just, I'm not gonna say overnight, but really quickly. And now we've kind of settled in around this 6.3, and you can kind of see that on this graph, right? If I was to hover over this, you'll see that we've kind of hit at 6.4 a little bit recently, and then we dropped down to 6.18, 6.2. I mean, this is very much hovering right around the 6 to 6.4, 6.1, 6.4, somewhere in there. Nothing drastic here. And again, I know I'm talking to agents out there. But when you start hearing rhetoric about interest rates, the simple response, and even though it's overdone, it is very simple. We are still historically low, like in comparison to what it has been. Now, again, that can cause all kinds of people backlash on that because they're like, well, yeah, but we were at 3 and 3.5 and 4. Yeah. But the key word is historically. And those were major exceptions that, to be honest, caused major disruption, major inflation. And there are some economists that argue, Peter Schiff, which is one of the leading economists that predicted the crash of 2008. I'm not going to go into his predictions necessarily, but I did read a little bit of that today. He's predicting that there's a crash coming, and he gave some arguments for that. And then there's a lot of economists that kind of spoke out against him and said that's not really what we see, because what it was back in 2008 is not what we see now. We had different lending practices and stuff like that going on. We don't have those now. But still the point is to be made is those low interest rates caused a major inflation, and that inflation and those prices of those homes have not come back down at all. They now stayed there, even with the increase of the interest rate. So you've got this, and we mention all the time, this affordability gap that is absolutely there. And when you start looking at the first-time buyer age and the average first-time home buyer, and what they used to be, and they were hovering around the 24 to 28 years old, and now that's sitting around the 32 to 35, I think, or somewhere in there. It's moved up because of the amount of money and income that's required to buy these homes at these prices. So the consequence to that low interest rate has now created the affordability gap even broader, where a much older demographic is now your first-time home buyer, which means there's two things. One is if you're younger, just getting out of college, the affordability to be able to buy a home in a lot of ways is out. It's just out for you. Unfortunately. Now, not always the case, but that's what the data says. And so you're forced to now rent. So the second thing is that if you own rentals and that kind of stuff, your demographic has really shifted into that younger generation because that's the only option they technically have in a lot of areas. Now, real estate is regional, so we can't just say that as a blanketed statement. You got to go into your own data, check it out, because maybe it's different in your area that you sell and your expertise is in. So keep that in mind. These are all generalizations as far as a nation goes. So don't lose track of that. But anyway, that's where we're sitting. We're sitting right around that interest rate. All right. With all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the actual show today. And if this is your first time here, thank you for being here. And Brian J, I do appreciate you following me there on Twitch. That is great. I do appreciate you being here. Hopefully, I can give you guys some value here. So what I do here is I really try to focus in on articles that are being run in specifically into the real estate industry. And it's tailored more towards helping real estate agents navigate the landscape of what is going on in the economy and in the news. But if you're just a consumer, you've noticed with me talking about interest rates and those type of things, I think you can glean some information from this as well to help you be more informed. Because there is, and you guys know this, is inside of the news cycles, they have to run a lot of articles. So, and headlines and things like that have to be very, eye-catching and, polarizing to get you to stop the scroll and be able to read. So there's a game being played there, and you just got to be aware of that. My job here, and this is what I focus on doing, is I come on Monday through Thursday when I can, from 8:30 to 9:30 Eastern time, and I just go through some articles and I break them down into what I would interpret them to be and find the opportunity inside of these articles. And so that's what I do here. And so today, just so you kind of know what's coming, is I am going to be talking about the economy some. I'm going to be reading an article from Yahoo Finance. It's titled "Home Sellers Outnumber Home Buyers in Low Demand Markets." Then we'll go into a Fannie Mae article. This is by The Street. It's titled "Fannie Mae Predicts Shift in Mortgage Rates and Home Prices." So we'll talk about that. So this is going to be very economically focused. Economical focused. And then we'll switch this a little bit. And then the last article kind of on the economy / the real estate industry is an opinion piece by Inman. It says the housing market isn't breaking, it's being rebuilt in real time. And it's more or less talking about that article will be very much more specifically aimed at real estate agents. And then we'll end with an article, just kind of a helpful article if I have time. I'll try to get to it. I like to talk, guys. You guys know that if you've been here often. We'll get to an article by the National Association of Realtors. It says "Lights, Camera, Listing: How to Get Noticed in Real Estate." Again, shifting landscapes all the time, right? It can be very complicated and we can get lost in a lot of this noise. So we're going to try to just hone in on some of these things. All right. With that being said, all that opening, man, I think I opened up this show for like 15 minutes. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Real Estate Brief. I'm Adam. Today, we're going to be cutting through the noise. We're going to get to the truth that we find in the news. We're going to look at the data, and I'm going to give you some of my observations and where I believe you can find the opportunity. So if you're ready to gain your real estate edge, let's dive into our very first story. And this story is going to come to us from the beautiful people at Yahoo Finance. And a lot of times, Yahoo will aggregate other news sources and then populate it on their site. And I'm going to quickly just skim down to the bottom here and just give reference to whoever wrote this. It might be Yahoo Finance. It might not. I don't know. Yeah, it is. Okay. This is Claire Boston, is a senior reporter for Yahoo Finance covering housing, mortgages, and home insurance. So this is going to be an article specifically by Yahoo Finance and one of the reporters. So that's the context, and that's what we're talking about. So in this article, the title is "Home Sellers Outnumber Home Buyers in Low Demand Markets." The number of buyers in the market is approaching early pandemic lows. Okay, so that's the subheadline to this article. So let's just start reading this, and I'll kind of break this down as we go. It says, so far, home buyers aren't lining up this spring. Now, this is, again, keep in mind, a generalization of the whole. You need to, every time we read these type of things, I want you guys thinking about your own local market. Is that statement true? right? If that's true, then a lot of the context of what is going to come in this article is going to be applicable to your market. If that's not true, then paying attention to what's going on in the market and how your market responds to other markets will give you some advice and guidance. For example, is if you are in a more rural area and this is not true to you, but yet they're using national areas, which typically get more data from bigger cities, is your area a year or two behind what those big cities do? So in some ways, by paying attention to articles like this, helps you to understand what is to come in your local market. Okay, so we'll just keep that in mind. It says Redfin estimates there were 1.39 million home buyers in the market last month, not far off the recent low of 1.38 million seen at the onset of the pandemic in April of 2020. Okay, so we already set the stage. Not too much different there, right? The recent figures show a 10% drop compared to March 2025. Now, there's a lot to be said about that, and I'm sure they're going to unpack this, but let's just go ahead and plan in our minds and think through this. Why would that be the case? What would cause a 10% drop if we were to compare March to March, right? There is a significant thing that happened, and I think you guys already know what that is the external pressure on the market that comes from a thing called war. And if you want to use the term war, some people, I know people argue about that, but the war with Iran, right? That is an obvious external effect. Even if it doesn't seem like it should affect the housing industry, most of the time emotions play a major role in the economy, and that kind of external pressure would obviously make people to think through things differently, right? All right, meanwhile, roughly 1.99 million people are looking to sell, up slightly from a year ago, but down 0.5% from a month earlier. Now it goes on. This mismatch between buyers and sellers means that more parts of the country are turning in favor of buyers. Redfin considers just 5 of the top 50 largest metro areas to be sellers' markets, where buyers firmly outnumber sellers. So we talk about Newark, New Jersey, the Long Island community of Nassau County, New York, the Philadelphia suburb of Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, Milwaukee, and New Brunswick, New Jersey. So these are the areas that is seeing this disparaging shift take place, right? And we're seeing that there's now more buyers than there are sellers, and there's a little bit of a shift going on. In those regions, home prices were up 4.8% from a year ago. In other words, we got a supply issue here, right? We got less homes on the market, we got more buyers, so therefore prices are going to do what, right? What are they going to do? Compared to a 1.6 gain in buyers markets, across New Jersey and other Northeast metros, sellers markets still dominate, a reflection of enduring demand, limited new home building, and higher than average incomes. Now, we need to pause and really kind of think through this and realize a couple things. Is one, we do have a shift going on, and we have a supply issue, and that's the easy numbers. But then we got to ask ourselves this question is like, and we'll go back to a few live streams that I've had over the past few months talking about bills that's trying to be passed that are getting shut down and not going through, that are trying to address the housing issue. And look, there are things that the national government and even state government can do to help with these type of processes. If we have an inventory demand, how is it that we can generate and inspire more builders to build more homes, right? There's tax incentives that can be done. There's deregulations of zoning. There is many things that can take place to help that change. And I'm just saying that because we do need to be thinking through this and pushing legislation and having conversations with our senators and legislators about these type of situations, being involved in bills that are being proposed, excuse me, getting into the brass tacks of what they say, what they don't say, what their issues are, why they're not going through, being active. If you are a real estate agent, I encourage you to be very proactive with, if you are a realtor, be involved with RPAC and get involved with what bills they're representing and trying to push through and be active in that, because it has an effect here. When we look at data like this and we read statistics like this and we see this disparaging market of buyers and sellers, there are things that can be done. So I know slight bunny trail, but worth the conversation. All right. It says buyers have the biggest advantage in Miami, where there are nearly 2.5 times as many sellers as buyers, as well as Nashville, Tennessee, Austin, Texas, San Antonio, and Las Vegas. So those markets are a little different, right? Home sales data looks weak in what is typically the housing market's busiest season. Contract signings were down 4.1% year over year in the 4 weeks through April 12th, according to Redfin, which called the figures unseasonably slow. Existing home sales declined sharply in March from a month early, and mortgage rates have marched higher since then. So you see this shift kind of going on. Oh, this is, yeah. So William, thank you for this. William says this. Let me highlight this. This is good. He says, the National Association of Home Builders addressed the issue at their Las Vegas convention. I'll pull that up, William. That's really good. I'll make a note to research that out. And feel free to bring in the comments kind of what they said as well. That's good. I'm glad to know that. I made note of this. I'm going to look into that. Thank you. Kevin, good to see you, my friend. Good morning from you as well. You weren't there. Why? When were they? When was the convention for the home builders, the National Association of Home Builders? What was the dates of that? I was in Vegas last week. I don't think it was that week. Was it? If it was, I was at a different convention. So, yeah. So on Tuesday, the National Association of Realtors will release March contract signing data, which covers the period when mortgage rates began moving higher after the start of the Iran war. Economists surveyed by Bloomberg expect a modest 0.5% gain from February. As a realtor, you should know this information. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. All right. On Tuesday, so here we go. Claire Boston, senior reporter. So that's the summary of that. That's kind of what we see as a shift kind of going on inside of the real estate industry. There's all kinds of things going on. And look, there's things that can be done. There's things that we can do differently. And we need to be proactive in keeping tabs on what's going on. So just kind of in summary of this too, you know, when we start talking about markets and data and percentages and changes in the market, and we start talking about all these percentages, you know, one of the things I do often is I will go in, and when I have like a sales meeting with all of my agents, like I go in and I pull the information up and go into the MLS and I start pulling in to all of the data, what's going on locally. And when I pull into the local information, I start seeing what's going on. I can pay attention to industries that are moving in, industries that are moving out. I can begin to talk to builders. I begin to see patterns going on. And it's good to pay attention to what's happening here and being informed, but it's really, really important to go local and see what's going on in your market. Yeah. So William, you know, I understand your frustration there. And look, I don't avoid confrontation, and I understand people wanting to voice concerns and stuff. And, you know, William, you know, I understand it says, as a realtor, you should know this information. He says, don't educate yourself. You just play with other people's money. Got it. You know, buddy, you know, it does seem like there's some issues that's happened to you, and I hate that. And I've been doing this for a very long time. And, you know, this is an industry that has a whole lot of change that happens a lot. And it's a very difficult transaction to enter into. And I understand that there's probably issues about the money aspect of that. But the reality is, if you get a good agent, they're going to represent you extremely well. And they're going to protect your interest. And I've seen that time and time again. And I understand the frustration, William. I get it. But it's not about playing with people's money. That's for sure. So anyway, with that being said, let's jump into our next article here. This one here is going to come from, and let's see, this is thestreet.com, thestreet.com. And I read this every once in a while. I'll come back to this. They tend to do a good job pulling in a lot of information. Fannie Mae predicts shift in mortgage rates, home prices. The government-sponsored enterprise, GSE, released its April housing forecast with new predictions for 2026 and 2027. Key points. Fannie Mae's April housing forecast predicts higher mortgage rates and home prices than earlier estimates. Volatile rates and geopolitical conflicts contribute to uncertain housing market forecast, and home buyers should not expect, sorry, I forgot to share my screen. Home buyers should not expect sharply lower rates or prices in the near future. Now we'll get into this article. Let me zoom in just a little bit here. It's really small. Oops. There we go. There we are. Perfect. That's a little better. In my years of reporting on mortgages in the housing market, I've seen home buyers worry about two main factors when house hunting: mortgage rates and home prices. And this is true. And this goes back to what I was even talking about with mortgage rates. It's like very easy to kind of hone in on just that number. Like I get that. Like that's part of it. I was in the same boat when buying my first home. I was aware of my purchase price limit, but I was shopping at a time when mortgage rates were rising. If possible, I wanted to buy before rates skyrocketed altogether. I had to keep an eye on both sides of the affordability issue. Man, there's a lot of pop-ups. Fannie Mae, the government-sponsored enterprise, GSE, that backs many conventional mortgage loans, has released its April 2026 housing forecast. And I meant to actually load this up and actually kind of go through this, but I forgot to do that. The forecast breaks down many aspects of the housing market, but the two that always draw me in are its predictions for, you guessed it, mortgage rates and home prices for the upcoming months. And this is true. I mean, we got to keep our tabs kind of on what's going on with both those type of things, because it does help us to be able to advise correctly, right? I mean, it really does. It does help us to inform the client better in regards to what's going on in the market. In the Fannie Mae March housing forecast, the GSE's predictions were pretty optimistic, putting the national average 30-year fixed rate mortgage rate at 6% or lower through 2026 and 2027. However, and that's the key, we don't stop there. Fannie Mae's predictions were based on mortgage rates from February 27th, the day before the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran. After these attacks, interest rates increased for 5 consecutive weeks, according to Freddie Mac. So Fannie Mae's rate projections became unrealistic almost immediately. Consequently, Fannie Mae's April mortgage rate predictions were higher than its March ones. In its April forecast, the GSE put the 30-year fixed rate at 6.3 for second quarter of 2026, then at 6.1 throughout the rest of 2026 and 2027. So obviously you got to adjust things, right? And I talk about this all the time. All of the time. Is like, we can say all day long about predictions, and we can talk about those type of things, and we can hone in and say, look, this is what we think is going to happen. But there are things that just take place in our industry, outside of our industry even, that affect it. And we can't predict all of it. Like, there's nothing we can do to really be able to forecast interest rates, because something could happen like the Iran war that cause an effect. But again, we have to understand, like, when you start talking about, affordability and then inflation, and you start talking about interest rates, all these type of things, when you start focusing in on real estate, it's a long-term play. I mean, as a person that's looking to buy a house and live in a home, that's a different scenario, because you're buying a house to find the enjoyment for your home, a roof over your head. That's a completely different process, right? You're at that point, you're going to what you can afford based on your money and based what you need. And you begin to shop for the home, you try to find the house, and then you settle in. But when you're thinking of as an investor, interest rate and these type of things matter a whole lot more, because it's now all about the cash flowing and finding renters that be able to, take care of it and keep the upkeep of it, but at the same time still turn profitability, or it's not worth it. So you pay attention to more of the projections, so there are two different things. And really right now, when you start looking, and I mentioned this already, but the historical average, we're still in a very good place. Now, the issue really, when you come down to it, is not really the interest rate. The interest rate is, again, historically low. But the problem really comes into that affordability problem. And the inflation of the home is still very much there and present. And because of that, you now have less people that can buy homes. And that's the sad part about this. And a lot of economists are back and forth on where we might end up with this. There could be an amount where this does crash down just a little bit. But when we say crash, we got to use that very carefully and maybe call it more of like a reset, because of the amount of equity people do have in their homes. If you go back, when they're buying with like 3-4% interest rates, they have a lot of equity. So if the number of the value drops a little bit, it's not like they're underwater in their homes. It's just that they're not going to be making as much money off of their home if that market was to kind of reset a little bit. But at the same time, you still have a very reasonable interest rate here. 6.3 is not out of the ballpark, especially if you were alive in the 80s. If you were selling real estate in the 80s, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is very mild. And I'm sure you guys hear this all the time. Let's see here. But here's an important note. The April rate forecast was based on rates from March 31st. According to Freddie Mac, this was when rates were at their highest in a long time, nearing 6.5%. Yeah, so that's good to know. Rates have since decreased for 2 straight weeks, with a 30-year rate at 6.3. I suspect Fannie Mae's April mortgage rate projections are still more realistic than its March ones, because rates have been volatile due to issues such as tariffs and the war in Iran. As long as geopolitical strife impacts Americans, there are opportunities for home loan rates to increase. Fannie Mae forecasts higher home prices. And this is where we get into a little bit of the interesting things, right? The Fannie Mae Home Price Index, HPI, measures quarterly changes in national housing prices. This includes all single-family homes except condos. Fannie Mae updates the HPI at the beginning of every quarter, so the HPI predictions in its April housing forecast were different than those in the last 3 monthly forecasts. First, let's look at Fannie Mae's updated numbers for quarter 1. Originally, the GSE predicted that the U.S. home prices would increase by 2.6 in quarter 1. Its latest HPI revealed that the year-over-year increase was actually 2.8%. Now, when we start talking about this, like we got to understand this is interest rate a lot of times is going to be adjusted by what that inflation number is. And the closer we are to the 2%, and if you start seeing a trend month over month or quarter over quarter of an inflation dropping closer and closer to that 2%, typically, not always, but typically that interest rate kind of follows that decrease. You'll start seeing interest rates drop just a little bit. And we're talking about micro, 1.1, 0.2, whatever. It starts kind of dropping in response to that decreasing of inflation. And again, they're just trying to balance that market the best they can, even though it's one of the most difficult things to do because you have all these unpredictable scenarios that could play out. But that's typically what happens. So what we're seeing, though, if they're predicting an increase of 2.8% over quarter, then that's going to be where we're going to say like interest rates probably going to either settle in or still inch up and maybe dip just here and there and nothing drastic because we're going above that 2% threshold. So these are predictions. We don't really know, but it's something to kind of watch. William, buddy, it's good. I love comments. I really do. It's just I understand that you've got a lot to say, my friend. That's great. In its previous HPI, Fannie Mae forecast that single-family property prices would tick up by 3% in second quarter 2026, 3.1 in third, and 2.4 in fourth. Then price increases would stay in the mid to low 2% range throughout 2027. So this is where we're going to think through things. Like, how do we get to that closer base range of 2% in 2027? That's kind of the question that I even have. Like, how do we balance this type of stuff out? And these are the questions everybody's kind of asking about the market. If we can get to the 2%, that would be a great place to be. That would be just an excellent place to be. The revised HPI foresaw stronger home price growth in 2026, 3.4, 3.8, and 3.2. So we don't know. These are predictions using models that they use, and we don't know for sure exactly what this will play out. And again, it's unpredictable because we're kind of in a weird place right now with everything that's going on around the world. So we don't really know. But what I do know is that there is a lot of equity in people's homes. Interest rates are kind of hovering and stabilizing to some degree, which does build confidence in a consumer to feel more pro going out and buying or selling. So that brings us some stability to the emotional side of that. Income is a big factor. When you start talking about like, is income rising? Is it falling? That's very relative to where you live. In some markets, I've read reports where, the income is actually increasing. I've seen other areas where, again, jobs are leaving a certain market. So obviously income kind of goes down, those type of things. So there's certain markets are faring better than others. And this is why I always go back. Like, we can read these type of things and we can pay attention on the national level, but we got to bring it in local. I mean, because it really does come down to being local. So in summary of that article, what we can see is Fannie Mae expects the mortgage rates to stay higher for a longer period of time than they previously hoped, with some gradual declines kind of built in there. So that's what Fannie Mae is kind of expecting to happen. So we can pay attention to that, listen to that. They're mentioning like home price growth and what it's expected to do, and they're kind of moderate on that, flatten in some areas. They're not predicting a plummet in home value. They're addressing some of the, protecting the current homeowner equity that is there, that is kind of taking place. So that's a factor. We can talk all day long about the lock-in effect. And I mention this all the time. The lock-in effect is those that bought, pre-pandemic or during the pandemic and a little bit after at the low interest rates of like 3%. Every year that goes by, every month that goes by, there's less and less people that are entering the market that are locked in. So over time, that kind of begins to heal that wound a little bit, and that thaws that kind of environment, because the people's lives changes, right? Marriage, kids, retirement, whatever, you name it, job relocation. They're forced to then have to do something. And sometimes the interest rate is not the only factor to keep in a house, because if you have a bigger house and you don't need it, you're paying a lot more than maybe the interest rate would even save you. So you have to get into the numbers. You got to know the math. But what do you do with this? What do you do with this? Pay attention. I would encourage you to go out, meet with, lenders that you have a relationship with, talk about the programs that they offer, the interest rates that they have, what is the tools and resources they have for certain types of buyer groups that are looking to try to buy. If you've got a younger couple or a younger person looking and wanting to buy a house, going out and talking to lenders about what they offer, and then being aware of those type of things. So when that person comes to you and needs guidance and encouragement to be able to go into this industry and into buying a house, that you have an understanding about what those things look like. And then, the other side of that is when you're talking to sellers and you're going through neighborhoods and you're talking to sellers, really educating them on the numbers and the math. If they were, let's just say they were a baby boomer, which that's becoming your next big movement of sellers, is if they're a baby boomer and they bought during the pandemic and they got a low interest rate, but they're sitting on this big house and they have no kids at home anymore, they're off at college or married or whatever, going in and talking to them and doing the actual math and helping them kind of rationalize this out and where the benefits are of selling and downsizing versus the cost of just staying locked in on a higher interest rate with higher maintenance and larger utility bills. These are the conversations, and this is the thought process behind this. Ultimately, we want to make sure that we've got an understanding and clarity on what it is that we're trying to do, and how we serve the clients, and make sure that we help them correctly. And the only way we do that is by being educated and by knowing. And those that are on Twitch can kind of see William's comments there. And even though William is having, some concerns about, real estate agents and what they've said, he says this here. It says, real estate, really? I have never met a good agent. People were concerned about money. How insightful. You should write an econ book. Was Donald Trump a good real estate guy? These are all statements. And look, it can be, in some ways there's a tax against real estate agents in what William's going through, but I feel like William's coming from a position where he's had an experience, and that's what he's dealing with. And to be honest, I don't think we should ignore it, even though it's like in my comments and it's a negative and it's a kind of an attack. The reality is, I don't necessarily disagree. There are some agents that have not been educated, that have a guide that has guided people wrongly, and it's because they're not informed. It's because they're not educated. It's because they don't know these things and they don't read the articles and they dissect the information. So there's truth to what he's saying. There's truth here. So, and regardless of your first interpretation of it, it's true. We have a burden on us. If we are going to be the professionals that we claim to be, the burden is on us to know things and to research them out. Now, I will push back, on William about as far as I should have been there and should have known this information. The reality is I do the best I can as a person to stay informed, which is literally what I'm doing here. But to understand this market fully, contextually, in every single market, to be able to speak to every scenario that's going on is literally impossible. But that is another reason, as agents, we have access to tons of information, tons of peers, and tons of other professionals that can guide us and give us information. We have brokers, we have agents, we have attorneys, we have lenders, inspectors, clients. We have feedback from all different directions that if we are diligent in our work and want to know the truth, we'll seek it out and get to know it and understand it. Like, we will seek these type of things out. I will take William's advice here and say, yeah, I should know that information, but sometimes I don't. But now he's brought up a good point, and I did make a point. The National Association of Home Builders addressed the issue at the Las Vegas convention. So I will be researching that out. I mean, that's how this works. Okay, with that all being said, let's talk about article number 3 here. This one here, we're switching gears slightly. It's still kind of, economy based, but it's really going to be more focused on real estate agents and talking about us internally, how listings are handled, how we distribute information, all those type of things, right? That's the conversation we're going to be having. So in this, and this is an opinion piece, and I don't know if I pronounced the name right, but it's Deb Sifkin. Sifkin is the writer of this. It's an opinion piece on Inman News. So what's happening is she's kind of suggesting the housing market isn't breaking. What she begins to talk about is it's being rebuilt in real time. So what we perceive to be the way we've always done business, and this is going to be a conversation in regards to like MLS and, syndication and portals and AI and all those type of things. And how her opinion on this is this process, all this information. We've been talking about this for a while now, but private listing networks and Compass and Zillow and what everybody's doing and MLSs and realtors and all this kind of stuff. What she's, in her opinion piece, what she's going to be talking about is that our industry, specifically being real estate agents and in our market, it's being rebuilt right in front of us in real time. And that this is a kind of, to be honest, a refreshing kind of step back observational view that is seeking some understanding and truth that we find inside of all this noise. And it's going to be moving us away from a lot of this arguing between who's got the right idea on this, and focuses more onto the structural evolution of how we do business. And we just going to read through this, dissect it a little bit, and use it kind of as a way, again, remember, it's opinion piece, it's her opinion, but we're going to use it in a way to talk through this when we start reading articles about other companies and their plays and what Zillow is doing and all that in the MLS and what we should do there. We're gonna use this as kind of a foundation for that, okay? Because I found it very, very interesting to read through this article. With all that being said, let's go ahead and talk about this. Quick drink of coffee. All right, the title is, "The Housing Market Isn't Breaking, It's Being Rebuilt in Real Time. While the industry debates exposure," in other words, exposure of the listings. How do we get our listings syndicated and get them out there and expose the listings? And we have this whole debate going on, all this kind of stuff. It says how buyers find homes is being rewritten. It's being rewritten. There's a lot of noise right now about where listings should go. Brokerages, MLS organizations, and portals are actively debating how listings should be handled. We've talked about this a lot, right? When they should be shared and who controls their exposure. Most of that conversation is happening among the people who create and distribute listings. Okay, so we are the recipients of the information, but we are not the ones that is creating the information. All of this is happening because Zillow's decided to do what they're doing, Compass is doing what they're doing, and everybody else is kind of following suit. The MLS has their responses as far as like private listings. If I list a property, what do I do with it? What rights do I have? What rights do I not have? All of that is being initiated by the people that are creating that movement. And it's specifically those that control how listings are distributed. We are reading it in real time, observing it in real time. And my argument would be that we're pawns in a lot of this real-time movement. But at the same time, and she goes on to say this, but at the same time, something else is happening on the other side of the market. Buyers are changing how they search. The result is growing gap between how the industry organizes listings and how buyers actually find homes. I'm going to read this last paragraph and I'm going to give you a little bit of my thoughts on something I even heard last week. If you step back from the headlines, that gap starts to explain why the current moment feels unsettled. The real shift is not just about where listings are placed. It is about how the market itself is being reorganized and where buyers now go to understand it. The housing market is not breaking, it is being rebuilt quietly and in real time. So here's what's actually happening, right? And this is just a lesson even in just the news cycle, how we become, observers of it, but have no input and can't really control things. And in a lot of ways, all the talk about all the portals and syndication and listings and what that looks like, we have an opinion, we can say it all day long, but ultimately these companies and what they're doing is going to happen anyway. And then we'll have to navigate those decisions that they made that then affects us. But what we don't want to do is lose track and lose sight of the bigger picture and ask ourselves some questions. And some of the questions is like, what is AI going to do to the portals and how the buyer, the consumer themselves, relates and finds out and processes and finds listings? What does that look like? And we were talking about this last week at the convention in multiple scenarios and multiple sessions. We talk about Zillow and they're a portal, and Realtor.com and Homes.com and the MLSs and all this type of stuff. But then when we really get down to it and we start thinking about how people are beginning all of their searches, if we take this outside of the real estate industry as a whole, and we start thinking about it just as a buyer, as a consumer, or as anybody going online and beginning a search, what is the process and what do they do? Do people go to a portal specifically to begin their search, or do they start it somewhere like Google? And they type in the information, and then they get websites and they click. Well, here's the thing. That's not exactly what's happening here. She's going to get into this a little bit, but when they do a search, all the links show up. But the first thing that's happening more and more and more now is the AI of Google, Gemini, is now suggesting and aggregating that data and putting it on full display with what you want. And it's getting better and better at that because it's monitoring what you're looking for. It's learning who you are and what you want. And it's then suggesting and building that block of code in AI to then suggest the things you're actually looking for and delivering it a whole lot faster. So AI is becoming the new search way, right? It's like I ask it a question instead of like specifically saying I want a 3-bed, 2-bath home. I'm asking questions and it's suggesting, it's pulling up listings. So the argument is this, is like once AI, someone like Google gets access to all MLS data and all listings and all properties that we're going out and doing all the legwork for, that becomes the bigger risk for places like Zillow and everybody else, Compass and everybody. Everybody is at risk at that point because now the data itself is going out into Google and into AI that can then aggregate all that data. While at the same time, us as agents are the one validating the data. We're going out confirming that what the home is true. We're updating reports and we're updating the condition of the home, the bedrooms, any remodels that's been going on. We are the legs going in, giving the data out. So again, the burden's on us to do this type of stuff. So we got to step back and realize that AI and Google and all those places are becoming the main search portal for all things, including real estate. Let's continue on. I got to wrap this show up. What makes this moment difficult to interpret is that several changes are happening at once, and they are not all moving in the same direction. MLS systems are consolidating, becoming larger and more regional in an effort to preserve a shared, consistent view of the market. So we're seeing this across the board, right? Everybody's kind of talking about this. And it's a good thing overall. We need to have the consolidation of data so us as agents can have access to multiple things across state lines and all that, right? At the same time, brokerages and portals are expanding pre-market and coming soon strategies, introducing listings and stages, and giving sellers more control over how their listings are exposed. Layered on top of that, consumer behavior is shifting. Buyers are no longer starting with a portal or even a specific website. Increasingly, they begin by asking a question. This is what I was talking about. And the systems that answer those questions pull from a wide range of sources rather than a single database. In other words, Zillow and all these portals is not where they're going. Their data might be showing up in these search results. So there's a little bit more of that SEO stuff going on with AI in the background, using our data to then aggregate it and put it in front of them off of Google. You can already see how this plays out in practice. A home might first appear as a pre-market listing within a brokerage network, then surface on a portal as a coming soon property, and only later enter into the MLS. Meanwhile, a buyer may not encounter that property through any of those paths. They may begin with a general question in an AI-driven search tool and only see a portion of what is actually available. In that environment, the market experience starts to depend on where you enter it, not just on what is for sale. See, with Zillow and stuff like that, it's like I syndicate there, and their argument is they're going to help me get more exposure for my property. And then their model is very interesting. Give the lead to somebody else that pays more money, or maybe get back to me if I agree to all their terms, right? Maybe. But the reality is, are people going forward going to go specifically to Zillow and get that information? If every website out there, if the MLS itself had all the data and syndicated straight to Google AI, and we control that information that way, and then the information would go straight back up there, the information that we are generating as real estate agents, we are the ones going out and verifying, and we have to be accurate on it, or we get called out and we get in violations and everything else. If we are the ones going out and gathering that information, who's syndicating it to AI, and why does Zillow and the portals get to play this game? Okay. Meanwhile, a buyer may encounter that property through any of those paths. They may begin with a general question in an AI-driven search tool and only see a portion of what is actually available. In that environment, the market experience starts to depend on where you enter it, not just what is for sale. Transparent. Within the industry, the issue has largely been framed as a choice between flexibility and transparency, as if improving distribution will naturally improve outcomes. On one side, there is a push for more seller control and less rigid, one-size-fits-all systems. On the other hand, there is a concern that limiting exposure fragments the market and makes it harder for buyers and smaller brokerages to compete on an equal footing. Both have arguments, okay? Both perspectives are grounded in something real. I 100% agree. That statement right there, both perspectives are grounded in something real. There is a truth to both sides to the arguments. But, and this is true, but they share an assumption that warrants closer scrutiny. They assume that the way listings are distributed is the primary driver of the market's performance. In practice, that is only part of the equation. So here we get a little bit more into her opinion, right? When exposure precedes decision-making, the market does not improve. It becomes louder. There are more options, more visibility, and more pathways, but less clarity about what those options actually represent. At the same time, the definition of visibility itself is changing. Like, what does visibility mean, right? Zillow has their term. Visibility means on my platform, I syndicate and you can do everything with it, right? It's changing. Buyers are no longer starting with a single website or even a known set of listings. Increasingly, they begin with a question. They describe what they're looking for, where they want to be, and what matters to them. And the systems answering those questions assemble a version of the market for them. This is becoming the norm. Like I would go to AI and look, I'm a married man, 3 kids, being relocated to Texas, Austin, Texas. This is my income. This is what I've got. Help me understand the market in Austin, Texas that fits my needs. Okay. This is a scenario, right? That's not what everybody's doing, but they're starting to do that. They're starting to ask those questions. And what does AI do then, right? Try that. Take your own life, go into Gemini, ChatGPT, or Grok, or whatever, and put in your scenario and see what happens. The divide. That version is not always complete, and it does not always align with how listings are being distributed. This creates a new kind of divide in the market, not just between pre-market and on-market listings, but between what is available and what is actually seen. All of these changes point to something the industry has not spent enough time addressing. While there has been significant focus on how listings are handled, far less attention has been paid to how decisions are made before those listings ever reach the market. Every listing carries a set of underlying decisions, whether they are explicitly structured or not. So think about these questions that she proposes here, okay? Think about this with your own listings, okay? Your listings, and how would you answer these questions as a consumer? How quickly does the seller need to move? Okay, that's a question that a buyer has because their scenario determines if that home is even a viable option. What level of exposure aligns with their goals? So the seller has certain goals, and what does that look like? How should the home be positioned relative to the current market? What do I need to do as a real estate agent? What does me as a seller need to do? What trade-offs are acceptable between price, timing, and certainty? These are very significant questions because Each one of those, especially if you break down price, timing, and certainty, those are things that are valuable in the marketability of the home. Is the price going to hurt the timing? And then is those two things going to hurt the certainty of a buyer being able to get qualified, the appraisal coming through correctly, the inspections being able to go through? Are those things addressed to bring certainty to the deal? When those decisions are not clearly defined, they tend to surface later in ways that feel reactive. Pricing adjustments start to feel uncertain. Marketing changes feel inconsistent. Offers become harder to evaluate because there is no clear framework behind them. In that environment, increasing exposure does not solve the problem, it amplifies it. The gap. What's emerging is not just a shift in tools or platforms. There is a widening gap between how listings are being managed and how the market is being experienced. That's a good quote. There is a widening gap between how listings are being managed. What is it we do to manage those listings with our sellers? And then how the market is being experienced by the buyer. Because these are the buyer's questions, right? They're trying to relate to the property, the area they're moving to. How are those questions being answered? One side is focused on distribution. The other is navigating the interpretation of that distribution. Seen from that perspective, the question facing the industry starts to shift. The future of listing strategy will not be defined solely by whether a property is pre-market or on-market. It will be defined by whether it is clearly positioned, appropriately exposed, and easy to interpret within the broader market. Right? That's marketing of a home. It's got to address all those it's got to answer all of those questions. None of that happens by accident. It requires decisions to be made deliberately and in the right order before exposure begins. Like if you're going into a listing appointment, you need to understand the market. You got to understand the type of home it is to be able to understand the marketability of that home, to address it to the right clientele. So you got to clearly position that home correctly. Then you got to think about the exposure of that property. What is the best exposure for that property? Where should I market that property to best position that property? And is the way I portray that property, my descriptions in the photos, is it easy for the buyer and the consumer to interpret what they're looking for and what they need? And is all that cohesive? None of that happens by accident. The industry will continue to evolve. MLS systems will consolidate. Pre-market strategies will expand. Guys, they're not going away. This is going to be a push this whole entire year, maybe even to next year. Portals and AI will continue to reshape how buyers find and evaluate homes. We're just getting started on the AI front, guys. Those changes are already underway. But if the goal is better outcomes, the focus cannot stop at where listings go. It has to include how decisions are made before they even get there. Because the quality of the market does not come from how widely information is distributed. It comes from how clearly that information reflects the decisions behind it and how it can be understood by the people trying to act on it. So when you're going in and you're talking about marketing a home, you gotta go in with those questions that the consumer has. And when you're positioning to represent the seller correctly, you need to understand that buyer demographic extremely well and the buyer of that home. And that is going to tailor your response on how you deliver, how you expose, how you market, all those type of things before you ever go live with it. These are the questions. The good agents that understand these type of things are going to get more listings and going to sell more properties. That's what we're looking at, guys. That's what we see here. And you can kind of see this. And AI is getting really good at catching the nuances. Think about this. As we put more and more data out there, it has more and more accuracy in predicting the outcome of what the buyer is looking for when they start asking it questions. When they start asking questions about neighborhoods, locations, and restaurants, and what's it like to live in this area, and they go straight to AI and start asking these type of questions, it has an unlimited access to information that is pulling this kind of stuff together. It might even be the point where you as an agent, you get in your mind that you can leverage AI when it comes to structuring and marketing that property. But it doesn't go by just going into AI and just simply saying, I need a listing description for a 4-bed, 3-bath house and blah, 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 blah area and this amount of square feet and blah, 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 right? It goes farther than that. It's like, I'm getting ready to list a house. It has these features. I'm struggling to understand the buyer's questions that they're going to have in regards to this and who my clientele would be for this type of home. It's located in this area. It's got these amenities with it. Is this close to hospitals? Is this close to the things? What can you tell me about the location of this property and who you think it might be relevant for? And you can use AI to give you a generalization about what the consumer themselves are going to be looking for. Then you bring in your market expertise, your negotiation understanding, the law and the navigating of the contracts, your experience into the equation to help navigate those two worlds and merge them together to get that property correctly positioned to go live and be marketed correctly to address the concerns that the buyer has. This is the process. This is like the future of marketing, right? It's not just, I got good photos, I got good description, I'm just gonna throw it out there and just wait for everything to happen, right? And not think that I need to be answering the buyer's questions in regards to that home. I mean, these are an opinion piece, and you at the surface, you look at this and you say, this is okay, this is not really that relevant. This is very subsurface. It's not that deep. No, it actually is very deep. This requires you, when you go in to do a listing appointment and you start thinking about marketing that home, to stop, reflect, do research, dig in deeper, understand how to truly represent that seller extremely well to best position that property. Because all of this noise that's going on with Compass, Zillow, and all these portals and syndication and MLSs and all that kind of stuff, when you get down to it, it's the buyers and the sellers that is our concern. We got to do what we're allowed to do and not do what we're not allowed to do. But at the same time, AI is in real time. What she's saying here is happening right before us. And we need to be aware of these type of things. We need to be aware of this. And that's what this is going to help us do. So anyway, I had another article I was going to share. I've ran out of time. I got to hit the road. So let me skip on down here, make sure if there's nothing else. Yeah, I think that's it for today, guys. That is awesome. I do appreciate everybody being here. I don't take it for granted. I thank you for taking time out of your busy days to come here and listen to me talk. I appreciate that. I do pray that I'm helpful here, delivering some information that will help you navigate your real estate transactions and your clients better and be better informed. Yeah, that's my desire. So thank you guys so much. I do appreciate that. I will be back here tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, doing this again. We'll go through some more articles. We'll talk again. And then Thursday, I will not be here. I might do a makeup session on Friday. Just so you guys know, Thursday, I've got some meetings I got to get to. I will not be able to be here doing the live stream, but I will try to maybe do a makeup one on Friday, just so I can get a couple more in this week and pick up my routine the next week more, regularly, Monday through Thursday. So that's the plan. That's what we're doing. Anyway, that is your real estate brief for today. If you found this helpful, please consider hitting the like button to tell YouTube you'd like to see more of this type of content. I greatly appreciate that. And consider subscribing, following me on TikTok. Always appreciate that as well. To join a community of real estate agents that are focused on building a business that is relationship focused first. Man, there is so much more I could have been saying, but that's what we have tomorrow. I'll see you guys then, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, right here where you're watching me. See you guys then. Take care.